Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Inspiring Leadership podcast series, which I am doing with my dear friend, Graham Brown. Now, I'm going to get Graham to introduce me in a minute, but I think it's important to introduce him. Graham, I think, is probably one of the world's top podcast agency hosts. He's a podcaster, and I just love him for his experience of life and the fact he's going to throw me all sorts of surprises as we do this session together. This is the first of a number we're doing. But without further ado, Graham, over to you.
Jonathan, thank you. It's a pleasure, a privilege to be here. And when you asked me to do this, I was more than happy, because yourself being an inspiring leader, I thought would be a great opportunity to dig into some of your stories. You don't talk a lot about yourself on the podcast, your podcast. So here's a chance to find a bit more behind the scenes. And there is more to this man as well, as I found out. So a few surprises we'll learn in the journey. That's right. So I'm looking forward to that and see how he kind of thinks on his feet. He's looking. I think he's a little bit defensive on the off the bat, because I did say there will be a few surprises here, so he's not quite sure. Yeah. But no, you're in safe hands. So I'm really looking forward to this, Jonathan. And obviously we did the podcast together before. I followed your podcast. I love the conversations you talk about, the way you do it, people you have on. So this is just all the stars are in alignment in the world of podcasting here.
Yeah, well, it was very interesting. As you know, I was in Peru recently doing this Ayahuasca and San Pedro ceremony. And part of the visioning that I had of the future was I could see up through the roof of the temple I was in, and I could see the stars, and that I was sort of up there with them, and you're one of them. So here I am up with the stars. So Graham, why are we doing this? What's in it for everybody who's listening and watching it on YouTube? If I perhaps go first, what I think is in it, and then maybe you could add to it. It's really, so we are fascinated by the whole topic of leadership and helping people raise their game, learning from real life stories that are going on in the news, people that we've worked with, our own life experiences, the people that we've had the pleasure of working with, interviewing, learning from. But it's so people can have a really fun podcast, and they like the banter between the two podcasts. I'm enjoying Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. They do politics, and there's a bit of tension, there's a bit of banter, and I think we're going to have the same. So what about you? What do you think?
More of one than the other. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to digging in, Jonathan. And leadership, it's talked about a lot these days, isn't it? Because we've been through some crises, and it seems that we're in this forever crisis now, whether it's COVID or geopolitical crisis. There's always something. And when that is solved, there'll be something else, I'm sure. So it's a time for leaders to step up. But it's often talked about, it pervades all kind of business talk now. Everybody's talking about leadership, being a leader yourself. But what exactly is it? We've all been touched by leaders, haven't we? We've all had our lives impacted positively by leader figures. Who are they? How have they changed us? And in history as well has been impacted by leaders. So I'm really looking forward to diving into that. And hopefully, shining a spotlight on new forms of leadership. It's not just traditional top-down leadership. There are different types of leaders out there as well. So let's kind of give them a stage as well. So lots to learn. We're learning ourselves as well, Jonathan.
Well, and the other thing is we're looking forward to you, the audience, sending us questions. I'll come on to that at the very end with Graham's website and mine. Send the questions to both our websites, and we'll pick out the best from the mailbag of those to mention the people who sent it and their question that they had for us. And this week, to start us off with, the theme is inspiring leadership, the introduction. There's Ian Pearce from Nottingham, and Ian said, and this is, of course, comes to the heart of some of the challenges we've got. Why the lack of good leadership in politics? Oh wow, that's a good
We don't have long enough, Jonathan, to answer that question.
But I mean, you look back over the years, it's made me think, whether it's Disraeli or I'm listening to a book on Onassis, his biography, which is fascinating. And he was in Smyrna when the Turks burnt it and killed 120,000 people. But the Greeks had come through and they'd destroyed most of the inland and every village they'd retreated from. They'd killed everybody. But he was talking about, it was actually Lloyd George had supported the Greeks going in there and going further into Turkey. And you thought he was good. And so throughout history, politicians, some people think are great, some people think are awful. But I think at the moment, there really is quite a lag. What's your thought?
All right, we'll nail our colours to the mast straight away. There's a lack of good leadership in politics today. Yeah, I mean, you and I will both remember a time at school when we were taught the names of kings and queens throughout history. And my son is just doing his GCSEs at the moment, and they still teach kings and queens and historical dates, you know, King John, King Richard. Do you remember, like at school, it was, so for those outside of Britain and British history, you know, King John, King Richard, one was a hero at one point, a great leader, wasn't it? And then King John was the bad guy, King Richard was the good guy. And then history was rewritten, and King Richard was the bad guy because he spent all the money on the Crusades, and actually he wasn't such a great leader after all. So it changes a lot, like you say. So I'm not sure, you know, maybe in years to come we'll look back on leadership today and reflect. I guess good leadership stands the test of time. And interestingly, Jonathan, I don't know if you know this, being a student of history, today, I know you're a busy man, it may have passed you, but if you're American, you would have known what the special significance of today was. It was the
Refugee
any guesses?
Refugee
No.
Day?
Your American friends are going to pillory you next up. June the 21st.
Is it when they went into Texas and they proclaimed that all the slaves were free?
It was stretching a little bit. Okay, should we help him out here? Today was the ratification of the US Constitution.
Oh, okay, right.
So, yeah, fair enough. It wasn't like, you know, well-known fact in British schools. Like they were teaching you King John.
They were teaching me King John, and of course they were teaching about King Richard, who was in love with Blondel, his bard, his bishop, and he was an early pin-up for it's okay to be different. So
it's okay, right?
He may have been blowing all the money and getting locked up in castles as he was trying to get back from the Crusades, and therefore absent from duty. But he
absent from duty. That doesn't make a great leader, Jonathan. I think he needs to stick it out. And John obviously, US Constitution today. That's the big. So that's a good example of leadership. Stood the test of time. A document's a map, wasn't it, for their belief system? That's lasted over 200 years. Obvious one for our American friends, but here's one that you may not know. I was just checking it out. I thought, what happened on this day? Like good examples of leaders. And here's one very few people will know, but I think is a good example, a badass leader, Tiny Broadwick.
No, don't know. Tiny
Never
Broadwick.
heard of her. No. Me too, right? Okay, so one for you. She was the first woman to parachute out of an airplane in 1913.
Wow.
How cool is that? Like 1930, she'd actually parachuted out of a hot air balloon 5 years earlier, but this counted the first out of an airplane. So you can imagine a woman doing it in 1913. She was known as the Doll Girl. Come and see the Doll Girl, you know, fall from 5,000 feet. But here's interestingly, she actually invented the ripcord. Wow. So have you parachuted, Jonathan?
I have with
military man
with the airborne, and I remember all too well out on Aldershot Common doing the jump from the balloon, and actually it was more scary than going out from the aircraft. And I was scared of both. I'm scared of heights. But actually, when you go out of the aircraft, you're supposed to coolly count 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, check canopy, and of course you still have the ripcord for the reserve. But I went 1,000, 2,000, come on, God, oh no! And I was untangling all the ropes above me, trying to kick my way around. You have to kick your way around to unravel the fact you get spun. And I only had about 800 feet before I hit the ground. Luckily, I landed in one piece.
Did you deploy?
It did deploy, but I much of my life I've spent trouble with a bad back from landing badly doing airborne training. But anyway. So there's much we can talk about in politics, but let's make it a bit personal. Go for these three questions for this month's introduction to Inspiring Leadership. What does Inspiring Leadership mean to you, Graham, and what does it mean to me? What does Inspiring Leadership mean to you? Who's
going first? Should we do you first? Because you started the podcast, so you obviously had an idea about inspiring leadership.
Yeah, inspiritus, breathing life into you, and this idea that you can't inspire anybody else unless you're inspired yourself. And I do believe that like anything, it begins at home. You know, any kind of change, you've got to sort your own shit out before you can try and give any lecture or any advice to anybody else. So I do believe that, you know, if I'm trying to help other people, I'm an early adopter of any of these things I read about, whether it be zone 2 training on my rower, and I'm out there this morning doing 50 minutes of that, whatever it might be, or just positive mindset, which actually helps. So I think inspiring leaders have to breathe life into themselves first, then into those around them, so they willingly follow them, not out of curiosity what they're gonna, like they do following Boris. What is he gonna get wrong next? You know, what's the clown gonna do? He's stuck on a zip wire. Oh yeah, how interesting. But really, because that leader cares about the people that he or she is leading, the people feel that followership. They deliberately want to follow that inspiring leader. And it's not just about having good values and morals and ethics, which I think, for example, Keir Starmer has, but you've got to have a bit of inspiration and a clear vision that people will get behind, while being healthy in the way that you do it. So you're not a narcissist. It's serve to lead. It's not serve me. So that's my thought. What about you, Graham? What does inspiring leadership mean?
I like this idea of inspiritus, to breathe, to be alive, and to inspire others as well. The key here is, and not through control, but through, it's almost like a love for somebody, isn't it? That they you know, a leader figure is loved. You know, because there's a real bonding. You see it in many, you know, obviously in the military, you have those kind of analogies. You see it in sport, you know, wherever you have kind of teams working together. And I'm sure we're going to go into that as well during this podcast, looking at some of those examples. For me, Jonathan, and we're going to go into some of our examples today, aren't we? We're going to put together our list. We're going to commit our list to the audience to kind of give us some feedback on our inspiring leaders. You know, as I've studied leadership over the years, I have learned, I guess, that leadership's not a popularity contest. You know, if you want to be liked, get a dog. It's a lot simpler. It's an easier life. Yeah. But I think that if I look at what great leaders have done, they've chosen the path of most resistance. And I think this is an important undertaking for a leader, because a leader isn't just, you know, the most popular or, you know, the most influential or the most well-known. It's the person that's used that platform for good. And this, you know, you talk about morals and ethics. It's how do they actually use that for good? Because I feel that when leaders make change, often they're unpopular. And a really good example of this, and somebody I guess we're going to come back to later on, Martin Luther King. Who I believe was one of the most inspiring leaders of the 20th century. And he was at the time, so in 1964, so he born in 29, assassinated in 68. But in 64, when he was alive at the height of the civil rights movement, when asked in a Gallup poll, Americans voted 50% for him, feeling favorable about him, 50% against him, so it's neutral. And he just about ranked in the top 10 of the most inspiring Americans of all time. In 1967, before he was assassinated, he dropped off that list. And in that list at the time had people like Johnson, you know, the architect of the Vietnam War, Nixon, Billy Graham, the evangelist, Pope Paul, and not even Martin Luther King. So he wasn't even popular at that time. A lot of people saw him negatively when he was at the height of the civil rights movement. And obviously he was assassinated, but by 1999, he was voted the most revered American in history. So I think that, to me, that's leadership. It means taking people not where they want to go, but where they need to go. And that means being unpopular. And I think one of the mark of a great leader is they take, you know, the leader gets the first arrows, right? They stand up, they get shot for their people. And that literally happened in this case, and many leaders, I guess, are like that as well. That's a true, you know, measure of sacrifice. That's a real leader.
Time and again, when you look at leaders, and we're going to perhaps pick some that are now dead, but at their time, they weren't popular. or they were causing a problem, like Florence Nightingale at the time, was a complete irritant to the military in the Crimea because he was getting in the way. But give it a couple of years, and they realized what an amazing woman and inspiring leader she was. I was listening to a story about the Dogger and German bite and all the Met forecast for the weather.
Yeah.
The guy, the meteorologist who designed it all, actually committed suicide because no one was buying into it. But about a year after he committed suicide, they went, "This is a really good idea," and it's been going ever since, for at least for maybe 60 to 100 years. So yes, you're like philosophers. You're never understood in your own land or at your own
lifetime.
In your own lifetime. Yeah. Like my old Sergeant Major said to me once when he was, I think, ripping me apart, "Sir, you're a legend in your own lunchtime." And I think that was a big thing. How do you breathe life into yourself and others, and how do you breathe life into yourself and others that you lead and to the organization you work for? That's the next question. Graham, what do you think? How do you breathe life into yourself and the others you work with in the organization, so it is inspired as well? So you, your others, and then the organization, always, and your customers, of course.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what great leaders do, they tell stories very well, and not stories like "once upon a time," gather around. Not stories that are fabrications of truth, but really they are the truth. And I think a good leader has that ability. And I mean, a lot of analysis has been done on Churchill and his oratorical skills. That they say he put the English language to work and sent it to war. He could tell, the famous speeches, fight them on the beaches, all these kind of things that very, using a lot of analogies. So I think, what we do as leaders, whether we're leading a team of 3 or countries, is tell stories. Really, the promised land pitch is extremely powerful. If you paint a picture of where you're trying to get to, or what you're building, or where you want to take people, you'll find enough people who want to go with you. Of course, 90% of them will, like, "What are you doing?" But the 10% will want to. That's the love part, isn't it, rather than the like part? So I think a key part of inspiring others and in yourself as well is that storytelling. I guess it's part of why we do the podcast as well, Jonathan, is, because it is a platform, a stage for storytelling. And we can't underestimate the power of story. That's leadership is storytelling, and storytelling is leadership. They're inseparable. Yeah. So to become a good leader and to inspire, you have to tell stories.
Oh, so many things come off that. And if I just sort of pick up what you're saying, interesting, when I was doing some training in speaker training, we look, we shall fight them on the beaches. We shall never surrender. It was actually, I think a rhyming pentameter, but it's like Henry V. He often chose Shakespearean rhyming couplets. So we few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today who sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. I mean, he picked it up, and in that way that we remember. The other person is on my list, and I think he was on yours as well, General Colin Powell, or as he pronounced it, Colin, but it's actually an English name, which is Jamaican relations wanted him to be called Colin, but he chose the Americanized version, Colin. Very inspiring leader. Clearly in 2003 got into deep trouble because he said to the UN that there are all these weapons of mass destructions, and there's loads and loads of nukes and chemical things which didn't exist. So that really damaged him. That aside, and he was admitted that, a really inspirational leader. And he is a public speaker, or rather he was until he died a couple of years ago. But he lived until 84 and still doing public speaking at that time, telling great stories about his tough upbringing, how he didn't have the usual route, and the mentors and the other leaders who brought him on. So going from the inspiring leaders, like the ones we've just mentioned, who inspire us, to expiring leaders, the ones who suck the life out of you, like Harry Potter's Dementors, and they just take your soul away. What's been your experience of expiring leaders?
Expiring leaders.
Those who suck the life out of you.
Toxic.
Leaders, yeah.
This is like the old-fashioned leadership. I went to a boys' school until the age of 16, and I couldn't take it anymore. And I begged my parents to send me to a mixed school. So they took me out of the private school and sent me to the government state school. I was so happy because it's the first time I'd seen a girl when I was 16. But like you can imagine, I'm sure you can sense that these kind of environments had or were somehow attractive to that kind of toxic leadership. That it was very much, top down, old fashioned military command chains, and obviously I guess, from your experience, you've seen that evolve as well. The military is trying to become more decentralized, isn't it? But even in school, it's very much like you don't question, very toxic, very draining. And for me as a teen, it just provoked me to push back and fight that. And therefore, these sort of all authority figures became a target for me. So I was surrounded by those kind of, you talk about expiring leaders, I was surrounded by them. And, almost like a rage against them. Well, it's not healthy.
Stay with it, because it is very interesting. Other nations like the French cannot understand our public school, as it's called, because in American state, public and private, is very confusing. In that, sorry about that. I'm going to turn that off. In that, it has been the basis of quite a lot of problems in the character of people who've been through the bullying that went on, some of the intimidation, the command and control structure that happens in those old public schools or fee-paying schools. So you're paying to send them away. And the French said, what is wrong with you? Do you not like your children? Why do you send them to prison? And there's the book called The Making of Them, which you need to read, by Nick Duffel, The Making of Them. And of course, it was this threat. It'll be the making of Graham. We'll send him away to school. We'll impoverish ourselves to pay for his education because it's going to be worth it. It'll be the making of it. And of course, so many of our leaders in organizations have had this sort of privileged education, but you have to question whether it's a good thing or not. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely. There's some great books out there that talk about like the making of them. In the recently read Empire Land, which is really about the truth about the empire. There's good and there's bad. There's a lot of bad at the British Empire, but interestingly, a lot of good people, a lot of great work, but there was also the untold history as well. And I think what you allude to is that was how we built an empire. Is that we took these kids away and gave them this sort of exposure to this toxic leadership, because it then indoctrinated them in this idea that they could then do that in all these other countries, and that's why you have that kind of, there is that group of people who went to these schools and are somehow emotionally distant, and they can function like that. And we have it sort of it permeates into leadership in the political circles. Like you started off asking, why don't we have good leaders? Well, a lot of it is how we're grooming them from a young age. These sort of career politicians, and they go through this system. They don't have good exposure to emotional leadership. They don't have leaders who can show vulnerability, or leaders who can understand the opinions of other people. And that's why we have a problem at the top, is because at the bottom, the feeder into that is toxic.
Yeah, and this is so interesting with many of the leaders that I coach, and a number of the CEOs who've been through that system, like I have and you have in parts. Some of them come out well. A number of them come out well, but a number of them have learned to shut off completely emotions, because when they cried, they got slapped around a bit and told, don't blub, come on. And I must have been 6 or something when I went away to boarding school. Now, okay, my father had died. My mother was looking for other role models that I could find at school. Unfortunately, in the next house was a master who was abusing the boys. Now, I didn't know about it at the time, but it came out later on. And so you trust them to the duty of care. and they're having to harden themselves to an environment where later in life they do things which is not acceptable in the way that they treat people, and they can't build healthy relationships with other people with high levels of EQ because they've been focused on the IQ and not the EQ. Now, well, let's not generalize on all. Many come out and are very successful, nice, balanced people. However, there is a dark side to all this privilege and that sense of entitlement. Do you know who I am? You know, and that you know, we were meant to run the empire. We were meant to rule the world. Or, you know, you went to some of the top Ivy League colleges in America, and that gives you a privilege and a right over others. You know, you're the guys running the world. And French, the Grande Écoles, where the power distance between those elite and that few, you know, if you look at the politicians, nearly all of them have been to the Grande École. It's a sort of elitism going on. In many nations, it's the same problem. So how about, let's go on to our next topic, which is our top inspiring leadership role models. And you and I were just wanting to sponsor a few names and put some out there. What was your list? Let's perhaps, you know, you talked about Martin Luther King. Yeah. And I've talked about Colin Powell.
Should we do one each? We go down the list, one each, and why sponsor them. We have to kind of, it's like the balloon speech, isn't it? We'll have to sponsor them, and if they don't make it, we kick them out the balloon. So
okay, go. You go for the first one then.
Okay. I would like to put on our list, whilst we're talking about Martin Luther King, I'd like to put in Robert Kennedy. Yeah. Bobby Kennedy, as he was known. John F. Kennedy's younger brother. And I really didn't know much about him. Everybody knows John F. Kennedy, who I think is an amazing leader as well, by the way. Took us to the moon, after all, in a world of 4 megabyte computers. That was NASA, by the way, 4 megabytes. So Robert Kennedy was a man who changed himself, and I think that's kind of an important part. You know, he grew up in privilege, you know, white, middle class, educated family on the East Coast. All the Kennedys, you know, Irish stock, but he changed. And after the assassination of his brother, started spending a lot of time with mixed races, cultures, Latinos, Blacks, which at the time wasn't done. You know, we're talking 60s when, like, you know, the white people kept to themselves in America. Amazing guy in terms of his views in later life. You know, really did embrace diversity. And a lot of people say he was the best president America never had. And like his brother got assassinated, but, you know, I spent a lot of time reading about him. He was obviously, you know, a partner, not necessarily a friend of Martin Luther King. But if you ever get the chance, the listeners, there's a speech that Robert F. Kennedy does on the eve of Martin Luther King's assassination, and which is, he was supposed to be running his campaign at the time, and obviously he just found out that King was assassinated, so he went to address the crowd, who are mainly Black, African-American, and he just gave this off-the-cuff speech about loss, and, you know, it's extremely moving. And he said, you know, that I too have, you know, lost somebody to a white man who assassinated my brother, you know, and like he was speaking to a mainly African-American crowd, but like of all the places in the US, there were riots all that night because of King's assassination, but that was the place that there wasn't any riots, because that just shows the power of being able to placate and include people and to understand and empathize with them. So I just think he was an amazing man. And of course, like a lot of these leaders, Jonathan, I'm sure if you read one chapter in their life, it's pretty horrific. And you think, oh, that is not a role model, but they never are perfect. So I want to put in Bobby Kennedy there, because I think he was kind of like...
I'll go with that.
Yeah,
I'll go with that. He's definitely in the balloon for me too, and beautiful knowledge that you have of him from his reading. And one I'll add to it, going from America, we've had a couple there, and well, 3 actually, Colin, to Britain, where I'll pick a contentious one, Queen Elizabeth II.
Okay.
Just celebrated her 70 years on the throne. And I've had the privilege of meeting her on a couple of occasions. Obviously, I went to get my MBE from her. And just on a personal level, her presence I also was lucky enough to meet Diana as well, Princess Diana, who I think probably is also someone I found as an inspiring leader, and I'd add to that list. I hadn't had her on there before. Complicated, complex, her own relationships and all that went on. But again, I knew people who knew her well and had a deep respect for her. But the Queen, I remember in going up to meet her, I was very nervous, and I was in full dress uniform, going to get my bit, and I had my sort of minute and a half with her. She knew my name, she knew what I'd done, she knew why I'd got the award. She had no notes, she had no FBI earpiece, no one whispering in her ear, this is Jonathan Bowman-Perks. And she just chatted to me about it. And she made me feel like I was the only person that mattered in the room. And I was at the lowest level of the awards. So we were all people getting knighthoods and dames. But she made me feel, and I've never forgotten that moment, some 25 years later. And she then shook my hand and has this lovely way of gently pushing you away, which means you don't hang on to my hand. You're told this is, and she'll shake your hand and just push you away. So you're not clinging on to her before you go and taking up your time. You had your time. But I think she's been an inspiring leader, doing a quite a job of serving the country and making you feel special, and making millions of people feel special that she personally met, whether you're a royalist or not. For me, she's an inspiring female leader who is now, a great grandmother, I assume. But I think she should be up there.
Good choice. Interesting one as well. I'm curious about the meeting. Did you get dressed down on all the protocol beforehand? Don't do this, do that. What were some of the things that you could share, just in case I get at some point called up? When I get my knighthood.
Yeah, I think it's just the respect. Treat her with respect, she'll treat you with respect. Make good eye contact. Don't take more than your turn, because everybody else needs their moment with her. Don't be selfish, because she's all about serving, serve to lead. She epitomizes for me service and duty and loyalty to an organization that's bigger than that she gave her life up to from the age of 26 or whatever she was for the last 70 years. And she's going to die in the job. Few people are prepared to do that. Now, others might think, well, give it up, let bypass Charles and let the son have it, give it to Harry or William. But actually, she knows it's a duty, and whether it exists in the future for long, it's marked us out when the politicians like Boris lack any kind of moral compass and leadership. She has a moral compass. She has leadership, and she's been a role model to us.
It's an interesting choice. I don't think it's an obvious choice, but it's a good one. I'm not a royalist myself, but I think as her, her personality and what she's done a really good job. Let's face it, at the end of the day, if you just look at it from, let's say she held a public office and it wasn't, divine birthright, but still she's done amazing, really, because it's a thankless task. You're navigating public opinion for 70 years. Everybody's in your business and looking at what you're doing, poking at your family. But to kind of manage that for that long on that stage, that scale is phenomenal, really. You've really got to be good at what you do.
One bit of information that people don't know, I was lucky enough to coach the CEO of the Crown Estate. It's an organization that looks after all the land that was once belonged to the royals, but they've given it to the country. So much of Regent Street, Oxford Street, huge chunks of land, Windsor Great Park and all this kind of stuff, much of the coast, all the coast, and it's run by the Crown Estate. And the CEO said to me that her interactions as CEO with the Queen, Prince Philip, Charles, was always she was very impressed by their commitment and their sense of service. And she said, you don't realize that because they gave that to the country, we make many billions. It's 10 billion business, 13 billion now from it. And that we give money back to the taxpayer from all that was once royal land, which was given to the country. So everybody goes, why have they got this royal list? And they're being, well, actually, that was the deal. We'll give you all this land and stuff in perpetuity, but just give us a royal list of people who get paid. which is the return deal. So it's a deal. And I think people don't know that. They go, bloodsuckers, they're just doing nothing. But actually, okay, you're right. Inheritance, they inherited it. Let's move on to.
But they've done a good job of it. That's without a doubt. Because you could have put an idiot on the throne. Yeah. And it could have been, you could have put Boris on the throne and we could be having different.
Yeah. Or Donald. King Donald. Who are you going to have next? Who's going to be in the balloon with us?
Right. Okay. So we're going next. Well, we've done 2 Americans. Let's mix it up a bit. I would like to put in. Who else are we going to add here? I'm just looking down the list here. So, why don't I put in Soichiro Honda? That's going to mix things up. So Soichiro Honda was the founder of Honda Motors, funnily enough, and obviously Japanese post-war generation, extremely inspiring man, very humble. There was a generation of Japanese business tycoons that emerged post-war who were all about service. They were all about, 50s Japan was bankrupt and poor and in poverty. Like people didn't have proper housing or food. And they weren't the Japan of the 80s that emerged. And they had people like the Honda and the Toyota family, obviously. And, the stories are, for example, he started out gathering these old jerry cans and, these sort of disused, what do you call those? Like those petrol kerosene cans from the military, the Americans left behind. They would gather those and then they would use that and weld it as a bike onto a bike. And so they could put a motor and like a petrol reservoir on there on the bike, and they made these motorized bikes, and because they didn't have any transport and they needed work, and so he said, "I'd do this because then Japanese people could ride to work and they could work and they could make things and like rebuild Japan." And so inspiring. He ripe old age. I think he lived to his 90s, and didn't really, caught the public eye. It was very humble and wrote a lot about his sort of philosophies. Probably died a billionaire like most of these guys, but you wouldn't know. Lived a very sort of simple existence. So I think, like, to me, I see people like that and thinking, you could have done it another way. You could have, like be driving around in a Mercedes and, like bling bling or like showing off your wealth. Or, like telling people how to live their lives. But he was just, I just want to kind of rebuild and give people back their lives. And I think that's pretty awesome. Yeah. So I'd put him in there.
Okay. And I'll go with you on that one. And in fact, you reminded me of someone I'm not going to put in the balloon, but I thought of him at the time, Warren Buffett. Who also drives around in his old beat-up old car, lived in the same house he was in since 1937.
Utah, yeah.
And gave, I think, something like 1.5 billion to the Gates Foundation to be used for charities around the world.
Not his foundation as well, right? That's incredible, right?
He gave it to somebody else's foundation to...
how cool is that?
Yeah. No, I think...
But you're not going to put him in there?
Not yet. No, I'd rather have a think on a few others. I want to get an Italian. I'm going to put an Italian in there. Okay. And... it's the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, all right? So, okay, he's been dead for 2,000 years. Why are we choosing leaders who are dead? Is it because they've gone through the phase of when we all hated them? And
they're safe now, right?
We can revere them. We can put a statue. But I think Marcus Aurelius is an interesting one. The last 19 years of his life, he was not in good health. And he was in a lot of pain for a long time. And he spent those years in the forests of Hungary, fighting the invading hordes of Huns. It was Germans once again invading from the north, and but he wrote the Meditations, which have been used, as part of Stoic philosophy, and it was just really letters to himself. And not only that, but he was picked up at a really early age by Antoninus. And he sort of adopted him, and he went, right, lad, I'm going to mentor you and bring you on. You're not hereditary. And he could be in competition, but actually he looked after him, taught him. And a lot of the Stoics taught him things. So he was always learning. Even at the end of his life, when he was back in Rome on one occasion, he was seen scurrying along with his equivalent to his iPad, which was really his tablet, which he was going to, scroll on. taking notes. They went, where are you going? He said, I'm going to a lecture. But he said, look, why? You're so old. He said, you're never too old to keep learning. And I like that whole attitude that, and I'm going to until the day I die, and it might be not very long, who knows? But I want to keep learning. And I think leaders, all leaders are readers, but not all readers are leaders. And I think we need to learn, and we need to be open that we could be wrong, and that we're prepared to learn from others. Everybody you meet has something to teach you. So I want to put Marcus Aurelius into the balloon.
Why do you think military leaders particularly breed a lot of good leaders? Is it because of their training? Is it because of the environment? You know, they're dealing with death, I guess, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I've thought long and hard about this. Someone once said they have actually spent about £350,000 training and developing you in your 20 years in the army, Jonathan. And another friend of mine said, well, that was a waste of money, wasn't it? But kind enough, if an organization, if I'm suggesting an organization spends £22,000 on one of their leaders, they go, oh my God, that's so much money.
Yeah.
So if you think education is expensive, try the cost of ignorance. And what happens is a lot of the leaders in business are very ignorant about what it means to lead other people, about human psychology, about how to get the best out of people, about public speaking, about motivation, about, selfless service, about what are their values, what they stand for, who are they, how do they find out what motivates other people? They don't do any of that. And they just promote them into a role. And they go, congratulations, here you are, load more money, off you go, lead this organization. And normally the role models they've seen are bad role models. Whereas at least in the military, if somebody did what Boris has done, they would have resigned themselves immediately. They would not. I saw a letter from the chief of the general staff about the behavior of some members of the parachute regiment. And he wrote to every commanding officer in the army, he said, this is not acceptable behavior. And we dissociate ourselves from that. And this regiment needs to sort itself out before it's fit to go back on tour again. Because we are serving the country and we must follow the morals and ethics of the country. And that's why I think, that's why you see so many good military, okay, you get some famous ones. When they get it bad, they get it badly wrong. My Lai and things like this, where atrocities are committed. But at the same time, the really good ones, like General the Lord Danner, who I'd want to put in the balloon as well. His book up here on my shelf, Leading from the Front. He was my boss. And in the absence of my father, I learned so much. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm curious, like why. Obviously there's that idea of the greater purpose, isn't there? Which will attract the right people, I guess. So there's a bit of that. The training, the culture. And I wonder as well, because ultimately at the end of the day, I mean, if you fail as a business leader, you might get shunted aside, miss promotion. If you fail as a political leader, well, maybe nothing happens. Maybe you keep going, as we've seen. But as a military leader, people could die and do die, right? And, definitely that has to be something. That the cost of that expiring leadership is too high, because thousands may die. And historically, thousands have died as a result of bad leadership, right? You mentioned examples. They're well documented in history as well. So I guess that must be a part of it, is the cost of getting it wrong is too high. Therefore, it makes sense to invest in getting it right.
Correct. And just picking up a further one, a very personal story for me. I grew up from the age of 2.5 with no dad. Now, my father died saving the lives of 2 other pilots. He died in order that they could live. That one was the co-pilot who he got out of the plane, which was on fire. And the other one was the man whose plane it was, who he was test flying to make it safe, make sure it was safe for him as the commanding officer. And these guys I met afterwards, and they said, your father died saving our lives. Now, I don't know many CEOs and leaders in business who are prepared to die for those they lead. It's just not the deal.
Not many.
This is the covenant between, this is what Richard Dannett talked about. He talked about the military covenant. We will serve the country, but in return, when we've had our legs blown off or we've been killed, look after our widows or widowers and look after us with prosthetic limbs and things like that, which wasn't happening. The country wasn't doing its share of the deal, but he made it a clear covenant between the two sides.
Oh yeah, we've seen a lot of that with mental health as well, haven't we? PTSD with a lot of ex-servicemen as well. Only now people are starting to realize, right? Yeah, well, those are great examples. I'm sure we're going to revisit, hear some of your stories as well about your times in service. And it's good examples of leadership. Interestingly, I know it's not somebody we talked about today, but I've been reading Extreme Leadership. A book behind
Willink.
Jocko Willink. Yeah, it's a bit sort of, it's sort of masculinity on steroids. It's just kind of like, red meat eating, all that kind of stuff. It's cool, actually. It definitely has a place because it's done with like real genuine principles. Yeah. But it's interesting. He's a Navy SEAL, and like a lot of these special forces, that's their life forever. They are SEAL once and for all, and it's just interesting about their ideas of leadership. Obviously, special forces are a lot more decentralized, but a good example of one story in that where there was a snarl up, but all kind of things went wrong in Iraq. But he, when they called everybody, the CEO called everybody in, they could have all blamed each other, but he just said it was all my fault. That was the leader. He stood up and said it was me. Yeah. I'll take all the arrows. And I thought that was a really good example. That's the extreme leadership, isn't it? It's like completely owning it. Like, I'm not going to blame anybody here. If anybody wants to blame anybody, blame me. And we see examples of that in sport as well. I think, good sport leaders, I sometimes see interviews with people like Pep Guardiola, the Manchester City manager, who just sometimes the team doesn't play well. And rather than single out somebody, he would just say, it was me. And like, if anybody's going to take the blame, it's me. And I think that's a really good leader. And I respect those guys because it's easy to kind of say, no, it was that guy. It was the new boy who screwed it all up,
You're so right. And there's another classic example. General Dwight D Eisenhower went on to become president, as we all know. And on the eve of the world's biggest invasion ever of D-Day, 6th of June, 1944, he wrote 2 letters. One letter he wrote in it, congratulations, this has been a great success, and I give all credit to Bradley and all the others, and the different Patton and the different generals who'd been in charge of different parts of the elements of the invasion. And then he wrote the other letter, which was, I'm really sorry that this had not worked out as we'd hoped, and it was all my fault. No blame given to anybody else. He owned it. And I think this extreme leadership is also extreme ownership. Yeah. And I'm also, because I know you love your triathlons and extreme sports, as I used to do when I was a younger man. And
still can, Jonathan, no excuses.
Crazy. Is David Goggins, of course, another SEAL. I mean, he goes extremely crazy.
He's extreme.
He's got blood running down his legs, and he feels like he's crapping himself, but he's going to keep going. And extreme. But I love the guy. I love to have him on the thing. Who else? Let's. We've got a few more on there, but let's pick a couple more each.
All right. Whose turn is it? Is it yours or mine? Who did the last one?
I did Marcus Aurelius and Dan.
Marcus Aurelius, the emperor. All right, let's go from an emperor to somebody without office. I want to put in Greta Timberg, the
great
teenage or 20-year-old now climate change activist. Again, like faced huge criticism in the public, but it just goes to show. I mean, my son mentioned it a few months back, and he said, it's really interesting. This is when Trump was still president. He said, a teenager's taking on the president of the United States on Twitter, and the teenager's winning. I thought that's really awesome. That just goes to show that leadership isn't about office or power. It's about morals and, influence. That a teenager can take them on. And when she stood up and did that speech in front of the United Nations, or that speech about you've stolen my dreams. People have been talking about climate change for 120 years, Jonathan. They knew about climate change in the late 19th century. Swedish scientists have discovered it in 1880 something. So we had all the data. It's not like, we're not sure. It's been there, but it took a teenager to stand up and take the path of most resistance and tell that story. And that changed a lot of things. You know, that was kind of a pinnacle, I mean, a pivotal point in, you know, the climate change movement. And good for her, because, you know, if it was left to our generation, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, no, I think a really good choice. And there's so much that needs to be done about the environment. And, you know, as you say, back in 1914, when Sir Ernest Shackleton sent out in the Endeavour to go to the South, he knew there were these problems. Even then, he was seeing the changes that were going on in the environment even then. And he's somebody that I'd put in the balloon because he took them all out and he brought them all back. It might have taken them 3 or 4 years, but he never once gave up on all the people, every single one of them, even though their ship had been crushed on the ice and sunk and they'd been living off, you know, blubber and various bits and pieces. He was always keeping them going. And he personally trekked over South Georgia, which people have, modern explorers have tried to do what they did. They went, how the hell did they do these?
Yeah.
Boots with nails knocked through them.
Hobnail boots.
And a little small bit of rope.
And a sweater.
They got over here, yeah. A wet sweater and an oilskin. I mean,
Love it.
Everybody these days would have given up. And so that kind of leadership, he wasn't military, but he had that spirit, which was going on during the First World War. Well, everybody was fighting in the trenches. These guys were stuck in South Georgia and Elephant Island. It's a fascinating, Endurance is the book to read. It's stunning.
It's amazing.
And it is about
the photographs as well.
leadership.
If you ever get to see the photograph, the journal, because they had an official photographer, it's amazing. Like, you know, you really do see it. I wonder though, Jonathan, like, I know you and I both like those boys' own adventures and daring do, crazy tales of climbing mountains and all these kind of things. I mean, you've done some of them yourself. So, but, you know, do you think that is, like, you think about Shackleton as well, sort of a reckless type of leadership? You may say, well, you know, nobody got left behind, you know, bravery, but they shouldn't have been doing it in the first place. Maybe, you know, they followed him into this situation. So is that a good example of leadership? Should we be celebrating that? I mean, I love the story of Shackleton and collected many books about it, but
it is an interesting point. And, you know, was he so obsessed with it, you know, going back again and again on expeditions and trying to raise money for it? It is an interesting one, which always takes me to another person I choose, which is Oprah Winfrey. Okay, she's a billionaire, certainly a billionaire, probably multimillionaire. But if you study her life and what she went through and the abuse she had to go through and the sort of aha moment she had to be more of a leader, yes, I know she gets a hard time from some interviewers for the way she did Harry and Meghan, and it wasn't as balanced as it could be. But I think she's been a real role model to many people and got people to open up and be prepared to be vulnerable, not hopefully in a gratuitous sort of shaming and making a mockery of the people, but actually allowing things that were in the closet to come out of the closet and people to talk about things. So I'd put her in the balloon, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, she's been phenomenal success. The first Black woman who probably was a success at that scale, especially in business. I mean, in media as well, which is totally a white man's world. You know, amazing. Yeah, really. No, I definitely deserved and still going. You know, of course, she's going to get criticism for the interviews that she does, right? But does she care? Yeah, probably not.
And I think in some ways that's the key thing, not to care too much. Who else would you put in your balloon?
Who else would we put
Our balloon.
Yeah, it might be getting a little bit more controversial now, right? Should we go with a little bit of the contentious ones in there?
Yeah, please.
I know you're not a fan of him, but I would like to put him in here for the... Oh, no, okay, I'm looking down the list here. I was going to say Steve Jobs, because I know you're not a fan of him, but I do... but there's somebody better than Steve Jobs, and this is going to be a little bit controversial. Bill Gates. Okay. How about that? You know, when it comes to presentation and storytelling, Steve Jobs crushes Bill Gates. You know, they're a different league entirely, and Microsoft versus Apple is just not comparable. But let's go back to it. Bill Gates gave away how much? 90%, 95% of his wealth. And what really, really impressed me was before all this COVID stuff, and I know he's got a bad rap for that, but I think a lot of that's unjustified. But there's a documentary about him on Netflix called Bill's Mind. You should watch it if you want to kind of see how his MO, if you like, how he rolls. Really fascinating. You've got billions. What do you invest in? Do you invest in like a rocket ship to the moon, like curing cancer, like the big issues of our time, real big sort of ego things? You could be that man that saves humanity, right? What did he invest his billions in after spending days, weeks? He like showed him reading all these books, doing some research, talking to experts. Like he went really deep into it, like you'd expect Bill Gates to do. What did Bill Gates invest his billions in? The problem that he wanted to solve. And this is the funny thing, Jonathan, because like when they asked him, what did you put the money in? He said, diarrhea. And it's like, what? It's like, I've just dedicated my life to solving diarrhea. And I think, to me, it's like, man, you are a leader, because he basically had worked it out that one of the biggest killers in the world is poor sanitation. And whether it's like toiletry or supply of fresh water, in developing countries, it's the silent killer. People don't see it. Millions, hundreds of millions of people die as a result of dysentery, typhoid, diarrhea, all kinds of infections. But it's not a sexy disease. It doesn't have a great brand like cancer, right? Or like climate change. And to me, it's like, wow, that's something else to think like that. And I think he deserves a place for that.
Yeah, and I think before he set up the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which Melinda must be given a lot of credit for the ideas and the drive behind it. And I know they've gone through, tragically, a separation. I'm sure they're divorced now. And so that drew lots of ire. I do find him, a mixed character, in that, he's quite lacking in EQ on occasions, very high on IQ, probably like many of our leaders on the spectrum somewhere of their ability to read other people, but being very clever. Like he'll go into this log cabin and then take about, 20 books, and he'll read them all. He can read at great speed, and he learned about so many different things and connects them all together, which I find very interesting. But what he's done with all the wealth he's had in setting up this foundation, which is selfless and does amazing work, I do think he should be in there. I want to go on to the organizations, the books, and then next month. But before we do, who else, we don't have to shout out for the thing, but who else might have been on the list and still is worth thinking about in future sessions? Would you perhaps mention 4 or 5 others that you might
got left behind in the balloon? I'm having a look at some of the names that we got on the list. They're mostly there's a couple of yours there. Do you want to go with those? I've noticed.
Yeah, I actually might have put Barack Obama in there. Now that's contentious, but Barack Obama for me is an inspiring leader, as opposed to his replacement. I don't mean to be a Republican or
which one?
But I think Barack versus what's his name? Donald somebody. Anyway, I mean, to me, he's the expiring leader, the antithesis of leadership. But he gets such a following from many people I know who think he's the best thing since sliced bread. But for me, he's not an inspiring leader. So I would have businessmen like Thomas Edison in there, maybe women like Amelia Earhart, Rosa Parks, Mother Teresa. And then who else might you have in there?
I like Barack Obama. I just think as an individual, he just exudes calm and confidence, and I think he exudes respect. You want to like him and you want to respect him, and I think a lot of my American friends obviously were a little bit ashamed about his replacement, and Barack Obama was the one that they felt that was when people could look at America and think, okay, this ain't too bad. So, obviously it's not black or white. It's not, he's perfect. There's a lot of bad things there. But as far as he went, he was one of the best, I think, of his generation. So absolutely. He was a statesman. I think that's the word that I'm looking for. He wasn't a Boris or a Donald. He wasn't going to let you down. He would play the game and do it really well.
Yeah.
So I think.
I agree.
Yeah, I like your choices. Rosa Parks is good. Again, somebody who's kind of taking the path of most resistance. Amelia Earhart, again, like our lady from earlier on, and forgive me, I forget her name, but like that's Tiny Broadwick, that was it, the parachutist. Mother Teresa, I'm not sure about. I've heard many conflicting stories about her. Obviously, we grow up with that sort of image from school. She's kind of this saintly figure. But in later life, I've read a lot. For example, I know Christopher Hitchens, who's a huge, late Christopher Hitchens, huge critic of Mother Teresa. So I've kind of been obviously influenced by that. So I'm not sure. But like a lot of the, I know we chatted about Gandhi as well, like a lot of these leader figures. And I think he was amazing. When he died, he didn't have any office, didn't hold any position of politics or nothing. It was just Gandhi, just that guy in the loincloth, right? But I know with him as well, there's lots of, even Indians are very critical of him as well. So it's never perfect, is it?
No,
Even
never
in
is.
these leadership stories, you're going to be disappointed with something that they've done, right?
The more you read the biographies about the people, you go, oh, I didn't realize that about them at all. Angela Merkel, for a long time was seen as quite a heroine. Now her pro-Russian stance of, appeasement and trying to stop Ukraine joining the EU and things like this. Back in 2014, they're going, what was she up to? What was she thinking of?
You never know, do you?
No.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Barack Obama as well. Like, it's like with him, I'm sure lots of things went on, which you probably thought that's not what I thought he was about. Yeah. We don't know, do we? So
we
that's
really,
the thing.
And we can, here we are, two armchair critics.
Yes.
But actually, we're trying to look for the good in them, but we're also acknowledging that we all have feet of clay, myself included, definitely, all the faults I've made. Gosh, I could write a few books about it. In fact, the thing to do these days is to write the alternative CV, all the things you didn't pass, so the things I failed at in life, but what I learned from it. Let's go on to inspiring organizations.
Yes.
Graham. Brands are very closely linked to leaders. You got some really good views. I liked the 3 or 4 you chose. Do you want to share about which organizations get your thumbs up for being inspiring leaders in business or their field or whatever it is?
Yeah, so we were chatting about brands, weren't we, and organizations, and I think they're inseparable, like the leaders and the organization. You can't have a leading organization without a leading leader in there, right? I think that leader has to, even if that leader isn't front and center, they have to give the green light to the people to be able to lead. And I think that's what makes great organizations, is that the leader sets the tone, doesn't take credit. Like you mentioned some good examples of, that, for example, the military, where they don't take the credit for things. They take the credit for the failures only. So great examples of brands. I mean, in business, obviously, Apple, we've talked about, well-known example of the impact of leadership. You've gone through 3 leaders in their time. Obviously, you've got Steve Jobs, who really created that, and then the guy from Pepsi who came in who messed it up, and then obviously Tim Cook, who I think is very underestimated as a leader, but phenomenal, really. And then, in terms of the results that he's driven with, he's an operator more than an inspiring leader like Steve Jobs. But even with Microsoft, I think, we need to think about people like Satya Nadella, who's been, the results he's got with Microsoft is just phenomenal. Like one of the best performers in the last 10 years. When you thought, Microsoft, who are they? What could they ever do? And now nobody does Windows, Internet Explorer. It's all kind of history now, isn't it? Office, you don't use that anymore. But 10x that business just as a result. And interestingly, his attitude towards leadership is very opposite to the old Microsoft, which was very traditional top-down chain of command, right? Command and control. His was all about, look, if you don't want to work in the office, you don't need to work in the office, right? If you want to do these things, you can do these things, right? And, I don't know. I don't have the answer. That's his attitude towards these things. So that's been really refreshing. I'm sure there are many sides to that story, but I think those are 2 good examples, well known, Apple and Microsoft, great organizations, many, many bad things and faults in them, I'm sure. But if you want to find the good, there is definitely good in both of those.
Yeah. No, I think they're really good. And you also chose Red Bull,
yes,
with Dieter, and that's an exciting, fun brand. Even though I don't particularly like the fact that they're pushing on us a caffeinated sugary drink, which makes you a beast and keeps you awake all night long. So I think
the interesting thing is like all the people I know that worked in Red Bull don't drink it.
Yeah, and that's telling, isn't it? It's like the guy who took over Ford, Alan Mulally, who now he's an inspiring leader. I would have added Alan Mulally, and I got trained by Marshall Goldsmith, who's one of the top coaches in the world. And he coached Alan Mulally. And he said, one of the most inspiring leaders he knew, who led by example, went in and he noticed that in the Ford car park, no one had Fords. That's a bit telling, isn't it? And they had this, he had about 30 staff looking after him as the CEO, and he got rid of them straight away. And when do people go down and visit the big factory? They don't go. They don't go down there. No, we don't deal with those. Yes, you do. And he went down straight away, just unannounced, arrived, had a walk around, found out what's going on. That's inspiring. So I'd actually add, we're missing a few business leaders. I would have added.
Yeah, let's give them a shout out.
Alan Mulally. So inspiring books. I've got a book that I've been reading recently.
What have you been reading?
Yeah, I just well, because I'm dyslexic, as you know, I listen to audiobooks, just like I love podcasts. So I was listening to It Worked for Me in Life and Leadership by General Colin Powell, who I alluded to. And I think, he has his 13 rules of how to lead. He was a really natural leader who had stories, tips, anecdotes, and personally led by example. And he also came from a background which wasn't the traditional West Point one. He came from university, and the ROTC is whatever they call it. I don't know what it meant, but a very different background. English, Jamaican, original background, humility, kindness works. Lovely. Some of his rules to lead. I'll rattle through them because they're quite.
What did he have?
It ain't as bad as you think. It'll look better in the morning.
You say that one about dating.
Get mad, then get over it. Avoid having your ego so close to your position that when your position falls, your ego goes with it. So this is where people have to stop thinking, I am a CEO. No, you're Graham.
Identity.
It can be done. In other words, don't be a complete pessimist, but equally don't be a Pollyanna-ish that, everything's fine, it's great. But generally it can be done. How can it be done? Be careful what you choose. You may get it. So if you make a choice on it, be prepared to get it. Don't let adverse facts stand in the way of a good decision. So, what do leaders make? Leaders make decisions.
Yeah.
And they've got to be making decisions, because actually not making a decision is a decision in itself. Yeah. And often people dither and they wait for more information, but you've got to get on with it. You shouldn't make someone else's choices. You shouldn't make someone else's choices, and you shouldn't let someone else make yours.
Yeah.
So own your own choices.
Yeah, in life, for sure. Yeah,
really good. Check small things.
Yes.
He sort of stops you micromanaging, but there are times when you have to check the small things.
Yeah.
Because inattention to small things leads to big things. Share credit, where, a bit like Eisenhower said before. Yeah. Remain calm, be kind. And that lovely SEAL motto, calm is contagious. Panic is contagious too, but too much of that exists. Number 11 of it, 13, have a vision, be demanding. So there's clear overarching vision for what you want. Yeah. Everybody knows your intent and their intent in achieving yours. 12, don't take counsels of your fears or naysayers. Much of what you fear never happens. And finally, perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. Optimism is a force multiplier. And it really is this idea of certain things, certain people's strategic thinking. You're paid to make 3 decisions a year. Those are force multipliers because they just up the game. So
absolutely,
I really love
those are great. They were very, very practical and straightforward.
Yeah.
No BS.
Yeah, loved his book.
No fluff, right?
No. Good, really good listen. And he reads it himself. And
does he? Even better. I love it when they do that.
Yeah.
I hate it when they get a voice actor in and sort of this macho voice actor.
That's the point. He said, own it. It's your own voice. Yeah. You can't tell your
real.
life story.
It's authentic.
Someone else telling your story. No. What's your book? What would you go for?
Yeah, I got a book here. Staying with Colin Powell for a minute. It's interesting that like English Jamaican, obviously I knew he was mixed race, just looking at him, right? I'm just interesting that there's a sort of a group of leaders who have challenged tradition, who have, by virtue of being born between two worlds, if you like, have that sort of ability to get the best of both worlds. Like Gandhi, for example, we haven't mentioned him much, only in negatives as well sometimes, but he's interestingly a man in a loincloth. He was a lawyer. He was a lawyer in South Africa and then lived in London for some time, so you can't imagine that, this guy sort of with his spinning cotton thing. But even like, I was thinking like Bob Marley, like I never knew Bob Marley was half white, half black.
Wow.
A man who, has influenced a lot of people about issues of race and, history of like, slavery and so on. Things like that. But I think somebody's kind of like, even like Tiger Woods as well, another one. But, there's people who've really like changed the game, literally, and made people think and appeal to these kind of, because they're not of, like you say about the ego and identity thing, they're not of one world, that they're so tied to it. But they have this ability to operate between multiple worlds. So I think that's kind of an interesting facet in leadership. I'd be curious to explore those examples as well, not just in race as well, but all different kind of identities as well. So my book, Jonathan, because I've spent many years since the 90s living in Japan, and I'm married to a Japanese lady. My son is half Japanese. Japan's a big part of my existence. It was the first place I ever lived outside of the UK. If we grew up in the 80s and 90s, Japan was a thing. Sony, and it was like the apple of the day. But I picked this book, which is The Toyota Way to Lean Leadership.
Ah, yes.
And it sounds a bit dull because like nobody gets excited about Toyotas. But the thing is like Toyota's been one of the most successful brands, organizations in history. It came out of nothing, one of the most profitable. It's not building a rocket ship to Mars, unlike some, but it's remained profitable throughout time. Highest sales globally of all auto manufacturers. And it's just been very, very steady in its progress. But the whole point of lean leadership, interestingly, it's a philosophy that they teach. It's going all the way back to like, we talked about the Constitution. It's like the Constitution of the company is like, it's not about the Toyota family. I don't even think they run it anymore, but it's about creating leaders at all levels. And, it's the philosophy of creating that leadership. How do you create leadership? Owning mistakes. And just one small example of what leadership is, and I really like this, is that they've got all their kind of like, their sort of quirks and, how they do things, the Kanban boards and so on. And a lot of this has inspired startup parlance now. We talk about agile. It all comes from here. All that agile thinking is based on Toyota's manufacturing philosophy. But here's what's interesting. I love this, is that there's a leadership lesson, and we practice this in our small business, is that stop the line. So if something goes wrong in the factory, they have a policy, a philosophy, a leadership philosophy of stopping the line. So the whole line stops. So if there's like a machine that's broken and it's leaking, and or maybe I'll just move it over there, or I'll throw a towel down there, that'll fix it. They don't, they stop everything. And because that forces everybody to fix it and deal with the problem. You can't hide it. You can't push it away and just have this little hack, this little fix, and I can kind of do my own thing and get back to it. So that sort of stop the line philosophy, I think, is really powerful because it encourages everybody to think about solving problems, and everybody can take ownership of it. And it's not the boss's role. Like if you're just, fixing seals on a car or putting handles on, you can stop the line. There's a big red button. You just go ding, and the whole factory has to come and have a look at it and say, what's going on? How do we fix this? We're not going back to work until this problem is solved. And I really like that because that's really unpopular. People are going to get pissed off. Like, what are you doing? I'm trying to put in a steering wheel here and you stop the bloody line. It's like, no, we've got to fix this. And everybody gets at it. And so I think there's some really powerful insights. And you may not be building cars, but in terms of running teams, empowering people, and just solving problems without a vision as well. Their vision is like, how do we better serve society? We don't know the answer. I guess that is the vision, sorry, but they don't have a solution. It's like their solution is we'll just get better every day. And I think there's some great stories in there about leadership.
I think I might have read it a while ago, but I'm definitely going to read it again. Thank you. Love it. And love those things. And yeah, agile thinking, stop the line, leaders at all levels. And leadership is a choice. It's not a rank or a position. And it's an attitude, isn't it? I love that one. So next month, for next month, I'd like everybody to look forward. We're going to have one on the first of the 8 components of the Inspiring Leadership Compass, which you'll see on the website, which is MQ, Moral Quotient, which is about morals, integrities, values, principles, and beliefs. So we'd ask you, the audience, to send questions to Graham and myself, the same question to each of us, but just so we can have a think about it. My website, jonathanperks.com. Graham's is pickal.com, pikkal.com. So send us some questions. We'll pick those up and we'll include your name and who you are in the best kind of questions that we have. Be specific, sincere, and succinct in the questions that you have. And any observations for you in this of our first episodes? What worked well, what worked well that you like, you want us to do more of, and what would make it even better if, EBI, even better if we were to do it. And we'd be constantly looking to do Kanban ourselves with always looking to improve. So we're going to end with appreciation. Graham, do you want to go first or shall I go first? Being specific, sincere, and succinct, what we appreciate about.
No, you're good at this, so I'll let you go first because you're a natural.
Oh, I'm not sure I'm natural, but thank you. My appreciation of you, Graham, I just find your wealth of knowledge on a whole range of topics. It's like drinking from a fire hydrant. There's so much valuable information. I miss so much of it because there's so much good stuff, but you are a fabulous storyteller. And I've really enjoyed this session. So thank you. That's my appreciation of you, Graham.
Well, thank you. And, I've enjoyed it as much as you have, I'm sure. I've really thought that to have this opportunity, again, was a privilege. And I've really enjoyed, jamming on this subject. So I appreciate the fact that you've created this platform for people to give a voice to conversations that matter and to, build your community. And I really appreciate that because, you've been at this for a while now. And that takes some dedication. You've got your vision. You care about this enough. You're connecting with a community of people that care about this as well, continuing to inspire. So I've really enjoyed all of that. I really appreciate it, and appreciate a little bit of the challenge as well. It's a bit of a sparring. I don't think you kind of lie down and make it easy for everybody. So you're constantly pushing as well, which is great. It's like I think that kind of you always want that. You want somebody who's going to kind of if you don't lift your game, you kind of think, he's showing me up a little bit here, so I need to kind of up my game. So I really do appreciate that because I think that's sort of the positive, healthy competition that we all need, right? And you've got that you've got that energy. And so I have really, I think, enjoyed working with you on this, and this is the beginning. So it's not over yet, we're just beginning. And also, I will add a second appreciation. One thing I really like about you is that you surprise me. It's like, okay, he's a military man, brought up in military circumstances. He's obviously a member of the British Empire. So you would expect maybe a certain type of character, maybe, very fixed outlook on life. But he seems to be, there he was in the jungles of Peru doing his thing. So... and he's not a fan of Boris, as we know. So, who knows? There's maybe some surprises there. So I do really appreciate that because I think that he's a guy who's extremely open-minded about things. And that means I think he's always learning. So,
Graham, thank you. I'm constantly learning from you. And it's a real pleasure having you on the series. We look forward to everybody joining us next month. But the Inspiring Leadership podcast and Graham's podcasts are out there every week. And Tuesdays are when we publish them. Have a listen on Apple, Spotify, watch it on YouTube. And it's been a real pleasure being with you. And I look forward to joining Graham in a month's time. Bye for now, guys.